Did Powkiddy sequel a series of handhelds that got them in trouble? Yeah, they did. Greetings, Retro Zoltan here. For your consideration is the Powkiddy RK2023, something I bought last year that I finally have time to look at. And I have to be honest, I was kind of surprised Powkiddy thought it was a good idea to just continue the RK series, especially after what happened with the RK2020. One of my older reviews talked about it, and it seems like small potatoes now, but at the time, basically Powkiddy thought it would be okay to sell the RK2020 hardware with open source software on it without permission. It got so heated that the folks at Emulec flat out didn't support the RK2020, and the more you upgraded Emulec, the less functional it became. That and a handful of other gripes didn't really make the RK2020 a memorable item. So reminding people of this by coming up with another in the RK series is probably not a wise move. If I had Powkiddy's ear, I would tell them to make it something else, or even use AI if he couldn't feel creative. And in seconds it came up with some good ones like the Powkiddy Retro Flex and my favorite, the Powkiddy Retro Nova. Hell yes. Okay, with that out of my system, let's get back to reality and look at this thing. The RK2023 comes in two colors so far, one being black with blue buttons and a white one with black buttons, which was my choice. The price these days in 2024 is about the same as last year at $75 US. There's also a sharp looking all black wireless edition that goes for $15 more, but I'll talk about that later. Powkiddy sends the RK2023 in a box complete with the usual things that I expect: phone protection, the device itself, some directions, and the charging cable. I kind of miss the days where they would include a USB to SD converter, but I'm thinking they'd rather have you buy the SD games from them. Since I knew it was already running the Jealous operating system, I opted for the no SD card, since I was fully intending on popping my already game SD card in what I made for the RGB20 and toss it into this one. The RK2023 caught my eye with its design, and I agree with other reviewers who say it reminds them of the PSP Go. The plastic feels solid overall, with a mostly matte finish and some shiny parts, which I think looks okay. The two-tone plastic look sort of gives me a 2DS sort of vibe, which I really like. The front of the unit has a D-pad that has a unique rounded end shape, which is interesting. I have heard after a long period of time this can get uncomfortable depending on what games you're playing frequently. You can feel the rubber membrane feedback underneath, giving it a traditional feel that I appreciate. And it seems to pivot and corner nicely. No complaints here. The A, B, X, Y buttons are good and springy, and labeled, which I always appreciate. I think they're a good size also, so I really have nothing to gripe about here. Trigger buttons, even though they're not stacked, are good here. A bit noisy, but I've heard a hell of a lot worse. They all have a matte feeling that feels good and grippy for your fingers. Nice job. Start and select buttons are using the same plastic and are clicky as well. It's hard to complain about these buttons, honestly. And then there are the two analog sticks that are sunk in pretty good to allow easy pocketability, which to be fair is smaller than my iPhone. But it's as thick as two phones. These feel pretty good too and are clickable buttons as well. The screen on the front is a good size 3.5 IPS OCA screen at a 640 by 480. The screen, or maybe the covering of the screen, sports a proud RK2023 label, which I have mixed feelings about. I get brand recognition, but this, well, it just doesn't look right here. I already know it's an RK2023. For real, if someone starts selling replacements, I might buy one. The top of the unit sports trigger buttons, which even though they aren't stacked, work for the form factor here. The L2 and R2 buttons are smaller and raised, just enough to find easy, and I think it was a good decision here. It also has the volume buttons, which I always feel they're backwards to me, an HD port, which will definitely be looking at soon, a power button, and a reset button that's recessed just enough to prevent accidental pushes. I love that they did this. The bottom has two small stereo speakers, which confused me at first. I was really losing my mind for a bit trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. Also located on the bottom is the typical USB-C charging port, an OTG port, and a headphone jack, and the well-loved 2 SD card system. One for firmware and one for the games. There's nothing else to speak of here other than a small label on the back. As a warning during shake tests, some button rattling is discernible, which, while not a significant concern for me personally, it may give the impression of a lower quality build to some users. Quick stats for the RK2023 are the following. a 3.5-inch IPS OCA screen at 640 by 480, a CPU that's an ARM 4-core 1.8 GHz RK3566 chip, 1 gig of RAM, 3500 mAh battery, which is about 8 hours, and an HDMI port. Overall, everything I want in the system, with the exception of wireless, which is a shame because it's really annoying and almost embarrassing connecting your own. If this bothers you, keep your eye out for the wireless version of this from wherever you buy it from. This didn't exist when I first bought this thing, and I have all the regrets. Oh well. When you turn this thing on, you'll realize you're running Jealous, complete with the note, if you paid for Jealous, then you've been ripped off. As I understand it, Jealous intended for this message to pop up and make you wait extra time if you copy a custom firmware SD instead of installing it on your own system. So is Powkiddy being shady again? I would lean to almost. And I'm no lawyer, but it's a bit of a gray area since you're purchasing a system that just happens to have Jealous on it. To get rid of this, and I recommend you do if you want a faster booting time, is grab the latest version of Jealous for the RK2023 and replace what's on there. So what happens when I try to do this? A kind of a fail. It certainly worked, and I'm not seeing the "you have been ripped off" text anymore, and it does boot up faster, but at the same time I completely lost sound somehow. No matter what I did, even re-imaging this custom firmware, I could not get it to work. So back to the original firmware. Kind of upsetting, because for the life of me, I'm not sure how this happened. Going back to the original firmware certainly brought game sounds back, but nothing else. Despite me not really liking the background music anyway, it seems to be gone forever. How is this possible? I have no idea. Weird, right?
I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
After a lot of experiments and confusion, I'm moving on to ArcOS that supports the Powkiddy 2023 as well. And despite the fact that I can't use the Jealous Gaming SD anymore, it's working pretty good and boots up just fine. It's about time. If you're really interested in how to do all this, there are resources out there, but if you want them from me directly, please ask and I'll be happy to help out. Now, if you bought this with the Game SD, you're most likely going to get what the system boasts it can play, which is MAME, Nintendo 64, PlayStation, Capcom Play System 3, Neo Geo, Game Boy, Advance, Nintendo, Super Nintendo, and Nintendo DS. But it can certainly play a lot more systems you may be interested in. Just checking out the gaming SD card, you will see all the possibilities. I also added to the inventory of systems by adding Atari 2600, Lynx, CPS 1 and 2, ColecoVision, MSX 1 and 2, Game Boy Color, Sega Master System, Game Gear, Sega CD, Sega 32X, Dreamcast, and PSP. You can add more, trust me you can. Just be sure to load up your BIOS folder with what it needs for the systems that aren't working. I'm immediately impressed with the screen on this system, and the screen is significantly bright and colorful. All systems 16-bit and under work great, no complaint, and only minor slowdowns with Nintendo 64 and Dreamcast. Sega CD worked better than I expected, and PSP really wasn't that bad either, depending on what game you loaded up. Pico 8, one of my favorites, worked great too, but grabbing up some of the games required wireless, so out comes the Wi-Fi adapter again. Oh well. Nintendo DS on this works as well as you expect with a smaller screen. And while it's not for me, it's possible if you understand the controls to keep swapping the screen. As far as controls during gameplay, the D-pad overall felt good, but in the long run I can see how people were complaining about the rounded edges. On the more active games that required a lot more tilting and rotating, controls slowly over time started to become uncomfortable. The inset analog sticks work fine as far as portability, but for playing games, it's not the most comfortable. I think it might have to do with me having large hands, so your results may vary. One of the things that I love and respect about Powkiddy is they almost always try to include an HDMI port, which of course I have to test. In Jealous or ArcOS, it works fine. And I can see this being a good system for people really wanting to use the full HDMI screen experience. So overall, what do I think about the RK2023? After the initial troubles of the Powkiddy X55, I was really hesitant to think I was going to like this one. But despite the sound issues when upgrading, I'm really impressed. And there's a good chance I won't be putting this away in a box anytime soon. If you're looking for something portable that can handle most of what you're looking for at a decent price, I say this is it. I have some regrets. I didn't get the wireless model, which is more expensive, but better looking than adding your own for sure. I can't say it's perfect for PlayStation and PSP as far as comfort, but it's still something worth considering. And that's all I have to say about the Powkiddy RK2023. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for your continued support, and as always, I'll see you next time. Bye!